Hello and a very warm welcome to this digital conference organized by FSC Germany, and this means of course Forest Stewardship Council. My name is Maria Grunwald. I'm a German journalist, and this means I will be your host today, and this means you will have to apologize my German accent, but I will do my very best. This conference comprises 6 different discussion rounds or 6 different discussion panels on 6 different dates. We started last December with the question if voluntary certification of forests is a story of success or rather a story of failure. And this first question shows that FSC Germany has the aim to really talk in a critical way about the pros and the contrasts of forest certification, of voluntary forest certification. Today, at the second round of discussion, we will talk about the benefits and the challenges of FSC certification in the Congo Basin. And well, let us remember that the Congo Basin is the second largest block of tropical rainforest worldwide after the Amazon rainforest. It is also a hotspot of biodiversity. We have more than 400 species of mammals. For example, the very endangered western lowland gorilla. We also have 1,000 bird species. And of course, we also have a lot of different ethnic groups living here. The Bantu people, the Pygmy people. We have more than 150 different ethnic people living here. And the Congo Basin is, of course, a huge carbon sink, which means it's also crucial for the stability of our climate. But, and there's no doubt about it, the rainforest in the Congo Basin is endangered. There's no doubt about that. All of our 4 speakers underline that. And we have a lot of problems going on there. For example, deforestation, illegal logging, slash and burn, agricultural expansion, for example, to cultivate palm oil. These are some of the problems we have there in the region. And the big question is, can FSC certification help here or not? That's what we want to discuss today. But before I introduce our speakers, I would like to give you some rules of the game. Don't worry, we don't have so many. So some of the rules of the game are, we have approximately 90 minutes for this discussion. And basically for the first hour, it will be my job to ask questions and to discuss with our 4 speakers. And the last half an hour, that's your half an hour. So I invite you to contribute and to ask questions. And you have 3 different ways how you can ask questions. You can do it the old-fashioned way, but it's still very effective. You can send an email. It's an email to a German address because we suppose that we have mainly a German audience, and the German address will be, and now I switch to German, Konferenz@FSC my-deutschland.de. Jetzt habe ich nicht ganz ins Deutsche gewechselt. Nochmal, konferenz@fsc-deutschland.de. There you can send an email, and then we will check those emails and we will raise your question. The second option you have, and maybe you can see it already here in Zoom, you have a command bar below the video window, sorry. And there you can see a button called Q&A, probably in English. In German, it's called F und A, Frage und Antwort. In English, it's called Q&A. And there, actually, that's the most easiest way to ask a question because I can see it immediately. I will monitor that chat. I can see it immediately, and then I can read your question out loud for all our speakers. That's a very easy way, so use it. And you have a third option, which is also very nice. There must be another button below your video window here in Zoom. And the button says, raise your hand. In German, it's Hand erheben. And if you push that button, then the organizers will monitor that. They give me a sign, and then actually you can raise your question. I will probably say, okay, there's somebody from the audience who wants to ask a question. And then actually we will hear your voice. You can say in your own words your question. And of course, you can talk also with us. So that's another option where you can ask your question all by yourself. That's also possible. So I invite you to do that and to discuss with us. I will open up, as I said, approximately at 5 o'clock German time. If we have a lot of questions, maybe I open up a little bit earlier for you. But now we want to get to know our speakers of today, and that's why we say hello and a very warm welcome to Dr. Harrison Ochen-Kujang. I hope I did a good job in pronouncing it.
Pretty good.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're laughing. Okay, so it's okay. And he is since January 2019 FSC Director Regional for Africa. And he's right now joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. And he's a Kenyan citizen. He studied forestry. And I asked him, well, why forestry? Is there maybe some passion behind that? And then he said, no, it's a very simple answer. When you started studying at the University of Nairobi, it was the very first time at the University of Nairobi that they offered forest sciences. And so you were very curious and said, okay, if it's the very first time, I will study it. And today he says, I never regretted it. Well, I guess you're right, because your career shows that. He was, for example, Director of Forestry in Namibia for many years. He worked for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, as its representative in Southern Africa. He has also worked for several African governments. He has worked for international organizations, for example, for the United Nations or also the World Bank. And I asked all of the 4 speakers in advance, what is the biggest problem of forest certification in the Congo Basin? And he says, the biggest problem of forest certification in the Congo Basin is the fact that there is a huge market for non-certified wood or for illegal wood. We will get into that later. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Claude Martin. He's joining us from Nyon, a very nice and small town close to the Lake of Geneva in Switzerland. There he is. Currently, he's Chancellor of the International University in Geneva, which is a leading private business school. He studied biology, and conservation of forests became very important for him. And of course, I also asked, why did you study biology and why did you get into the conservation of forests? And he says, I thought it's a nice story. He says that he already loved the forest as a little boy in Switzerland and dreamed somehow of being a recognized researcher, maybe in the jungle, maybe in the rainforest, but he dreamed of that when he was already a little kid. And well, he made that. He worked as field biologist in Central India and as director of national parks in Ghana. Then he joined the WWF, and well, he became the Director General of WWF International. I think a lot of people in our audience will know you because of that, because of your time at the WWF. And he was also one of the founders of the FSC. So I would like to mention that. And well, he's a member of the Club of Rome. He's the author of the internationally known book, On the Edge, the state and fate of the world's tropical rainforests. And well, he says the biggest problem of forest certification, not only in the Congo Basin, but worldwide, is the fact that people are not willing to pay more or even a fair price for certified wood. Thanks very much for being here today. And now we say hello to Dr. Paolo Cerruti. He is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. He's senior scientist at CIFOR, and I think I have to explain at least once what CIFOR is. It's the Center for International Forestry Research. It's a non-profit organization that conducts research on the most pressing challenges of forest management worldwide. And the CIFOR, just if you want to know it, is financed by different private foundations, for example, the Gates Foundation, by governments, by universities, and also by UN agencies. He became a forester, and I thought that's also a nice story. I asked him, why did you want to become a forester? And he said, I never, ever wanted to work in an office. And there you can see he's already smiling. Right now, you are somehow in an office at home. But of course, you conducted a study that's very important for us as well. I hope we get to talk about it. He conducted a study comparing tropical production forests with and without FSC certification. So we will see if there are some differences there. And he says FSC certification I also asked him what's the biggest problem, and he says FSC certification and logging concessions are not really the main problem. That's what he says. He says the main problem in the Congo Basin is that people chop down the forest because they need something to live on. So I hope we get to speak about that. Thanks very much for joining us. And last but not least, we welcome Dr. Christoph Thies. He's joining us from Hamburg, Germany. He works for Greenpeace as forestry expert, and he also focuses on biodiversity and climate issues. Originally, Thies studied chemistry, but he focused very early on the effects of the paper and pulp industry, and that's basically the reason why he became interested in forest conservation, because there were so many negative consequences. And then he said, oh, okay, forest conservation is probably a very important topic. And I already said that he works for Greenpeace. Let us remember that Greenpeace left the FSC in 2018 because Greenpeace stands for a complete protection of primeval forests. And FSC does permit an industrial use of primeval forests. That's what Greenpeace says. And that's also the biggest problem of forest certification for Christoph Thies. He says clearly an industrial use of primeval forest is an absolute no-go. I said it in my words. It's an absolute no-go. And Mr. Thies, I would like to start with you actually, because you said industrial use. So I think we have to clarify that. Could you explain us a little bit more? What do you mean by industrial use? Because it's very obvious the FSC wants the governments or wants local community to use the forests. Yeah, because that's very important, because they know that people need to live on it. But you say you want no use at all at primeval forests or industrial use. What do you mean with industrial use? Can you explain that a little bit more? So I'm sorry, you have to switch on your microphone. We can't hear you right now. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Okay. Well, let's ask the organizers. Okay, can some of the other speakers give me a sign if you can hear him? I can't hear him actually. No, the others can't hear. Ah, there. Mr. Thies, try it again. Maybe there you were. Oh. Okay. We will give you some minutes. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Ah, now,
yes,
yeah.
Yes,
now
yes.
Maybe my headset between the preparation time and now.
You could understand me, Mr. Thies, yes?
Yeah.
You got my question. Okay,
I agree with you that all the key terms, of course, have to be properly defined. What we understand, industrial forestry, industrial is for us a term describing a scale, a level of intensity. Like when you use a forest with heavy machinery, you push roads into the forest for the transportation of the logged timber. You are logging beyond a certain volume of whatever, maybe a cubic meter per hectare and year in the long-term average, or wherever you put a threshold. I think of course, it's not clearly defined in a quantitative way that wherever you go around the world and ask a scientist or a practitioner, you always get the same answer. But I think more or less the concept is clear that it is a type of forestry that is beyond a certain scale, intensity, and impact.
So, Mr. Thies, to make it more clear, what would you allow then? What kind of views could we have in the forests, in the primeval forest?
Well, what is very important is to look at the very, very important role of the last intact forest landscapes. This is like the remaining quarter of the world's forest that are still existent in large tracts of primeval forests. And we believe, we are facing a triple crisis on the planet, which is a climate crisis, a nature crisis, and a health and pandemics crisis. And the crisis has common causes. And so we also must find solutions to this triple crisis, which in a way is one big ecological crisis, in an integrated manner. And we believe that the last remaining intact forest landscapes will play a key role in mitigating climate change, achieving nature protection, including the upcoming goal of 30% protected areas by the year 2030, which is not yet agreed, but there is a growing coalition of high ambition countries pushing for this, following the example of the Paris Agreement for Climate, to be agreed in October in Kunming, China, which means we need to double the areas of protected forest, and last not least, also to really reduce the risk of future epidemics and pandemics. I can put into the chat, I did last summer a little interactive map on the risk of the destruction of tropical forest and the increasing risk of global pandemics. And we hope all that we can overcome Corona this year. And I guess we also hope very much that we don't face the next pandemics in 2 years, which would be a disaster, not only for many human lives, but also for the global economy. Oh, and so we need much more radical solutions than we were facing 2 or 3 years ago. And that's why we believe the FSC is very active in Russia, Canada, the Congo Basin, and Latin America. These are the 4 reasons where the vast majority of FSC concessions happen. And all of these reasons are the remaining key regions of intact forests. And our big worry is that the FSC is way above the average, certifying in still intact forest areas, which are the very areas that we want to have protected and part of the 30% network on the planet by the year 2030.
Okay, there were a lot of issues there, yeah, but we understood that you want more protection, especially of the primeval forest.
This is where we are coming from, and we are not enemies or opponents of the FSC. It's just that's the reason why we ended our membership.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Harrison, I would like to ask you, because since you're a director regional in Africa for FSC, I would like to ask you, why does FSC allow unindustrial use of primeval forests? I use now the topic industrial use because it's the Greenpeace terminology from Mr. Tees, but why does FSC, would you also say that FSC allows an industrial use of tropical rainforest, primeval forest?
Well, thanks. Going by the definition that Dr. Thies has given, yes, it does. And it does this according to standards set and agreed within FSC, which is a global standard for forest certification. And I think responding to that question itself tends to move you away from the reason why are we using the forest in the first case. I think that questions also need to be asked. We are using those forests because it's a development imperative for a lot of these countries that host those forests. And we feel that we'd rather use them under some strict standards of management, and which allows not only the use, but recovery of those forest ecosystems which are under utilization. So I think we need to understand it in that broader context of development and the need to use the forest.
And Harrison, can you explain us a little bit more, because FSC has 10 basic principles, and they are 10 principles, and they try to hold on these principles worldwide, but then you have always national standards. Yeah. So in the Congo Basin, of course, you have different national standards for an FSC certification. So could you explain us what would be one of the standards in the Congo Basin where you would say that's really good standard that we already achieved?
Well, all the countries in the Congo Basin, Cameroon, Gabon, and Republic of Congo have new national forest stewardship standards. Now, those standards are consistent with the international generic standards that FSC has developed for all the forests. But I would say that the certification is done according to the 10 principles, and these 10 principles have got very strong social objectives in them, very strong environmental objectives, and of course, because this is an economic activity, we also have economic criteria as to whether the forest operations are economically sustainable. But going back to the social aspects, we believe it's very important for this country, for certified companies to take care of the rural communities that live inside or on the periphery or adjoining these forests, and that fair wages are paid and that taxes are due to the government. Legality is a very important principle in this certification principles, and that the social things like gender discrimination and all that are taken care of, and social welfare in general, much better than non-certified companies, I would say. Having said that, we are also very, very sensitive to the environmental concerns around which Greenpeace frames its discourse. We believe that if we didn't have FSC, the exploitation of those forests will go on anyway. But we'd rather have them done in a manner that is sensitive to biodiversity issues. So we've got a biodiversity indicators. We also are now debating on how to include the intact forest landscape indicators and how to safeguard them. We also have areas of high conservation value as is part of the criteria around which the forests are evaluated, or the management of the forests are evaluated. So yes, I can say that without FSC, we'd probably having worse conditions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Let's talk to Paolo Cerruti, because as I said before, you conducted a study where you compared tropical rainforest with FSC forestation and without FSC forestation. What would you say was the main result or the main difference?
The main result in general was we assessed several indicators. I think the broadest one that can be presented here is that there's much more sense of owning something for the longer term from the companies that have an FSC certification. Most of them, they are aware that it's a process. They are aware that it's not yet paradise, but they know that they entered this process for improving their own impact along the way, and it's a long-term process. It's not something that you can change, and the companies start from this certain level. The big difference, as I told you the other day, is also that in countries where the level of standard governance is very low, in a way, and this is neither positive nor negative, we can have different opinions, the companies themselves, in the location where they operate, they become a state for the people living around those areas. And so health system, education system, transportations, those are all services that in a way or another are provided by the companies in countries where there are no services. And that's not the same level that you will find around concessions that do not have certification. That's, as I think, putting it very broadly in terms of the big differences that we found.
Mm-hmm. But how can you explain that there are also, I mean, we were talking about the achievements, and you and Mr. Harrison said that the rainforest is better off with an FSC certification than without an FSC certification. And you talked also about the benefits the population gets, because the big companies, I mean, they pay a rent to the government in order to receive the concession, in order to exploit the forest, but they also have to pay a certain percentage to the local communities and for social development, for health development, etc. But still, we have a couple of examples of companies, Austrian companies, in the past where actually this didn't work, where we have problems with human rights abuse, or where the social welfare just didn't get to the local communities. Yeah, so we don't know where the money ended finally. Yeah. So what would you say, how can you stop that? Because we know those examples, they exist, and there are a couple of companies who had problems, and actually sometimes they had to hand in again the FSC certificate. Sometimes they could keep on working.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you said it yourself. The fact that we know that there are these examples, as I was saying, when I said paradise, is that not all certified companies are at the same level. One of the main recommendations that we made was about the auditors of these companies. They do need to step up a little bit in terms of how they audit the companies. But the fact that we can know those companies, it also an evidence that there is this process ongoing. And if every 6, 3, 12 months you are audited again on your own promises and pledges, that is a process in itself in a country where the government does not do that. So you have those 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 companies that pop up into the media at one point, and it's also one problem for certification. But you will never have the other companies that never put their heads above the bar, and they are not pointed fingers on because they didn't step into this better process, if you want, of putting themselves out and say, listen, we are trying to improve. The others are all way below the bar. And in that case, they keep going with their activities, unsustainable, with no respect for any rights. And nobody knows about that. As Harrison was said, the forest activities keep going, whether or not FSC is there.
So as I understood it, you would say the big benefit is that there's a long-term process going on of learning. So the companies learn how to get better. There are controls, there are audits, and that's why everybody learns. And hopefully this will help that we take more into account environmental issues, social issues, etc. Christoph Thies, do you think that's enough?
Obviously not, otherwise we would still be around in the membership, but I can agree with many things that I heard from Harrison and Paolo, of course, and we know each other's also partly from the past, and where we also agreed on many things. On Harrison, I mean, I want to emphasize that yes, I agree that FSC can bring significant improvements on any given location, including also, I mean, you're probably familiar with this recent French article from last year that FSC can also help containing deforestation, so that you know, you at least prevent that the forest is completely cleared to make space for pastures or croplands, which is of course a very important merit. However, this comes at the expense of increased fragmentation by forest roads, and at least in many other cases not, you know, decreased degree. And this is often the first step in adding pressure to the forest. And by the way, I mean, we are still facing the problem that while the name is Forest Stewardship Council, it's not Forestry Stewardship Council. In the daily practice, 99% of FSC's activity is to improve forestry. So the whole ecosystem is still, unfortunately, and I cannot blame the FSC for that, it's very difficult to make an economic model for that. But we have been discussing inside the FSC for decades how to certify protected areas, how to certify non-timber products, how to certify ecosystem services. I guess Paolo, Harrison, Claude, you will agree with me that in reality, it's still down to forestry and producing timber. And this is no different to my country here in Germany. We are not so much better than the situation in the Congo Basin. We are also depending completely on producing timber on the forest land. That's why we have all these monocultures of spruce that are dying in Germany since 3 or 4 years. So there is no reason to be arrogant as Europeans and think we are any better than the people in Central Africa. So Harrison, we are facing, of course, very different socioeconomic conditions. I agree. There's a lot of poverty. We are facing often a low capacity, failed states, high degree of corruption. And these are enormous challenges. But unfortunately, I have to say, we have to try to maybe try the impossible and attack at the same time the deforestation which is an enormous future problem in the Congo Basin, probably bigger than in any other tropical areas on the planet because of the enormous population pressure. And at the same time, we have to prevent wherever we can fragmentation of the last intact forest landscapes. And I agree, this is not an easy task. And you cannot everywhere just devote your energy 50-50 on these two very different problems. But we have to attack both.
Okay, I saw the raised hand of Paolo, but I would like to use the opportunity and to talk to Claude Martin. I will get back to you, Paolo, later. Claude Martin, you wrote that book on the edge, State and Fate of the Rainforest, of the Tropical Rainforest. And in the German subtitle, you also say how we can save the tropical rainforest. That's the undertitle in German. It's a little bit different. The subtitle in German, it's a little bit different than in English. So what kind of solution would you have? I mean, we heard the arguments of Greenpeace. Christoph T speaks with a lot of passion. We can understand that. And well, we have the FSC side, which says, well, but the rainforest, if it is used, it's better if it is FSC certified than not. What would you say as a researcher, as somebody who worked for the WWF so many years with all your experience, what could we do to protect more the rainforest if we still want to use it?
Right, thank you for your question, Maria. I think it is important to state that we all have the same aim. I think what Christoph says, that we need as large as possible contiguous forest areas in tropical areas, as well as in temperate areas, is absolutely right. And that was of course also my own intention with writing this book, to really assess how much of the contiguous forest do we have? How can we still protect it? How can we avoid fragmentation? This is how I started analyzing. And then you come across a number of surprising things, namely that there is a huge confusion when it comes to area assessment, particularly if you take the figures from FAO, which confuse at times tropical moist forest areas with dry forest and mess up figures so that in the end it is not a very helpful tool. If we look at specifically at the Congo Basin, then about half of that Congo Basin has been designed or declared as intact forest landscape by Greenpeace and those that did the satellite surveys, Potapov and Hansen and so on. So about half of that, about 85 million hectares, is intact forest landscape. And I completely agree with Christoph and all the others that we should do the utmost to try and preserve the integrity of that forest surface. But the question is how? Yeah, that is the big question that we should discuss here, because there are no silver bullets. I'm sorry to say, if you ask me, how can we save the tropic? There is no silver bullet. There is no single solution that will save us these tropical forests. I have always been promoting the duality of protected areas, and you would be astonished, about a quarter of the IFL, the intact forest landscape in the Congo Basin, is already in protected areas. Are they well protected? No, many of them are not so well protected. There is rampant poaching going on in many of them. Some of them must be even declared as empty forests. That means forests without big wildlife. Yeah. So a protected area in itself is not a solution alone. It can contribute.
It needs to be controlled. Otherwise,
it has to be, there must be other methodologies. And I must say, FSC, and I have seen practically all FSC concessions in Africa and many others that are not FSC certified. There are huge differences in forestry operations between FSC certified concessions and other concessions. About all the concession land makes up about 17%. So together about 60% of the IFL, of the intact forest landscape, is outside. What sort of an answer do we have? Does Greenpeace want to put the 60% in a protected area? That is probably illusionary. I think we need solutions, and this is what FSC, in my mind, can contribute. Unfortunately, only about 1.4% of the IFL is in FSC concessions, 1.4%. So we are talking here about 1% of the intact forest landscape that is included in FSC concessions. And the whole debate about motion 65 goes about what happens to these 1.4%. We should be refocusing our discussion on those forest land areas which are still intact and are outside these FSC certified areas. The conventional, as Harrison correctly said, the conventional forestry that is taking place, the very large part is conventional forestry, increasingly by Chinese companies and Asian companies that are contrary to all the sustainability criteria operating their forests. Many of these areas are even outside. As I said, 60% is outside even forestry concessions. And this is where slash and burn farming is going on. What sort of a solution do we have to stem that sort of development in order to protect these forests? So from my point of view, we are having a big fight about criteria in FSC, etc. But it's actually a minute portion. We are left with 6 companies in Africa that are FSC certified. Some of them have left. Some of them have been bought up by Chinese companies. Others have been converted to palm oil plantations. So what is the discussion then? The discussion is to try and bring all those that contribute to a contiguous forest cover. And I must say, and Christoph, I have seen FSC certified concessions that have gone through the first cycle and have been declared IFL. So the irony is that some FSC certified concessions are declared IFL. If they would not have been FSC certified, they would not be included in IFL. They may have been converted in the meantime. So FSC, in my mind, must make a contribution, and we should do everything to try and convert more of the conventional concessions into FSC certification. And this is where FSC International should be much more forceful as well.
Thanks very much for that. So if I understood you, you think there needs to be a duality. We need some areas that are protected.
Absolutely.
Especially the primeval. And you also say, well, but there's a lot of conventionally forestry going on, and it would be better if we somehow, if that conventional forestry becomes FSC certified, for example, because then they would have standards and then it would get better. So that could be a possibility. And you explained that there's a lot of problems going on. I want to focus once again on a possibly game changer. At least Paolo Cerruti called him that he's a game changer. When we talked in advance, I want to talk about the example or the special case of Gabon. Let us remember the president of Gabon declared that as of 2022, which means in 2 years, well, 1 year, in the year 2022, all forest concessions operating in Gabon will have to be certified by the FSC. And Paolo Cerruti, you said that could be a game changer, or the president and his declaration could be a game changer. Why?
Well, for the simple reasons that he's playing on the very nature of FSC, which was born about a premium price that has been never able to get, so from the market, from outside. And now you have the state that is reappropriating a role, which is saying that everybody must be certified. And in that case, you cut the the incentives that were supposed to materialize in the 90s for producing better, because everybody must be on the same line. But for me, it's a game changer, because it will show us whether, first of all, whether they are able to implement this thing, and second, whether the companies will raise the bar to the standards of FSC, or whether it will be the bar that goes down because everybody must be certified. And in that case, we need to be there very able, at least, to provide that same feedback that says that the bar should go up. We shouldn't just move everything down because everybody must be certified. So for me, it's very interesting. And it's only Gabon. It's several other countries that have adopted new forestry law recently. So the thinking is in the air. For me, as when you look at the governance or the political economy of this, it's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, but the situation in Gabon differs pretty much from the situation in other countries
Absolutely.
of the Congo Basin, because Gabon is somehow a rich country because of oil exploitation, or richer, let's say. It's smaller, it's less populated than, for example, DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this means that it's much easier to get concessions, yeah, if you don't have to live on. So do you still think this example of Gabon can be somehow a role model?
Well, Gabon is a very huge area of logging concession to start with. So even if you go only for one country, but you are completely right. No, but you are completely right. Yeah. There's very, very, very little population in the areas of Gabon. And I go back why I raised my hand before when Christophe was talking. I think we really need to go down to the geographies of what we are talking about. If you take Cameroon has 110 logging concessions, and most of them are outside of what we define as intact forest. So in that country, the question is different. What do we want? Because the concessions are there. Do we believe that those concessions should all go certified? I would say yes. At the level of how they are managed today, outside of those that are very few today certified, I would say absolutely, they must go. So if the government take up something and says that everybody should go to FSC, I'm for it. If the government doesn't do it, well, we still need to push for those concessions to go up or be taken by companies that are willing to engage. If you tell me DRC, it's a completely different thing. We have millions of hectares available. Yeah. So of course, and the largest peat area just found in the world. So of course, those peats should not be touched at all, completely. They should stay there. And when you say that, when you see that the government is giving out, or as an idea to give out concessions on those, there is no discussion. It's a no-brainer. So I think we really need to go down to each geography in each country and see what the solutions are for each of them.
Okay. Harrison, you raised your hand, that's good. My next question is for you. Harrison, what would you say? Paolo Ceruti said that one of the biggest problems is not the logging concession, I said that in the introduction, is that people chop down the forest or the trees because they need something to live on. If we're talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo, where people are very poor, where somehow they need a livelihood and they have it from the forest. What can you do to empower those local communities to, I don't know, to use the forest in a different way? Or do they need more education, or where would you invest to empower those local communities?
Before I answer that question, I would just like to respond to what Dr. Thies said.
Yeah.
I'd just like to confirm that last year, FSC launched the ecosystem standards procedure. So now companies that are certified can, if they can demonstrate verified gains, or verified ecosystem services in, say, water, carbon, biodiversity, they can have those claims made. And the first one was done in Namibia, in the dry woodlands for biodiversity, where the areas which produce sustainable charcoal actually have seen benefits from biodiversity conservation. So we now have an ecosystem services standard in addition to the forest production standard that he was referring to. Just a point of clarification. I agree with what Dr. Claude Martin has said about intact forest landscapes and what Paolo has said. And I just also want to quickly say that in Gabon, we've just hired a new coordinator and a new certification advisor to work with the government to achieve that goal of certification for all concessions by 2022. And that certification advisor is going to work mostly with the forest industry to do that. So one of the things I would like to say is that policy change in the government, in the producer countries of the Congo Basin would completely change the picture on forest conservation. And Gabon has shown the way. And I think there's a good potential that the Republic of Congo could go the same way with their new law. And we are working with them on that. And Cameroon, with a high degree of degradation, as Paolo has said, could actually gain from certification because we can begin to see those degraded forests recovering to become more carbon absorptive, to get more biodiversity back in, as Claude referred to, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot that FSC can do in the Congo Basin.
And Harrison, what makes you so sure about it? I mean, you said, I'm pretty optimistic that other countries will follow the example of Gabon. What makes you so sure about it?
Gabon has created what you call peer pressure in the Congo Basin. And it is providing some leadership in revolutionary thinking that by certifying forests, you can actually get more benefits. And what Gabon did, Gabon did three things which are very important. The first one was a logging ban, a ban of log exports. Then they created an economic zone for the wood industry at the coast in Libreville. So they are creating local manufacturing, which is actually showing that the products of certified wood can be used for economic development in the country, which goes against the traditional export of logs to be value added abroad, and all the other jobs and value is created outside the host countries. So I think Gabon is providing leadership in that area. Okay. And we are very excited. And one of the things in the new global strategic plan for FSC is to show or demonstrate the impact of certification on the economies of those producing countries, forest-rich countries. So that is the first thing that answers your question about how we can reduce poverty. I agree with Paolo that poverty is the greatest enemy of forest cover in Africa. And we need to actually derive more economic value from the big natural resources, the forest in those countries. So what Gabon is doing by creating this economic zone is one area. And I think in intensified agriculture in the already established agricultural areas could also help. And also to open markets for agricultural produce to the rural poor in Africa. I think if we consider the forests of the Congo a global resource worth protecting, then we need to expand the discourse on what is it that keeps these guys poor and what we can do as a global village to address the poverty concerns which militate against forest cover. So I agree with Claude. We need to expand the discourse.
I think I have to disagree here on a key point, if I may.
Yes, we have Mr. Tees, and then we also have Mr. Riestenpaat who wants to speak later. But first, Mr. Tees, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I also try to, I don't know if it's possible in the chat that the link about this map that we have made, if you can access the chat, then you can have a look. I believe that poverty is only one of several problems. And also the population pressure. I agree this, but what is a key problem is the fragmentation and the fast increase in the roads. Because the roads are also driving the slash and burn pressure. They are driving the expansion of slash and burn together with the population pressure. So I believe, Harrison, or if I may call you by the first name, that poverty is in the equation, but the roads are also a very important part of the equation. They are driving the slash and burn pressure. They are also driving bushmeat trade, and they are driving the risk of pandemics. It has been clearly shown in the Congo Basin that the risk of Ebola outbreaks is increasingly happening in areas which are still very forest rich, but where the fragmentation has started significantly. So road building is connected to health issues, to slash and burn pressure. And I think we need to do everything to really stop that. And unfortunately, Paolo, I agree, and Harrison, in many aspects, I think we see some hopeful things particularly from Gabon, also in terms of conservation commitments. At the same time, our own analysis together with Dr. Potapo from the Maryland University has shown that in FSC concessions, the fragmentation, the road building is even higher than in conventional concessions, which is really concerning. The only other country where we detected this in the world is Russia, which is a very different ecosystem. But we really need to get a grips on this and reduce the level of road building because this is a key risk for the forest. And Claude, if I may, on the 60% of the areas, yeah, I agree with you. It's not possible to protect them all, for sure. However, we have to face the fact that the forest, the primary forest on the planet, are very unevenly distributed. The vast majority of them is in Russia, Canada, the Amazon Basin, and the Congo Basin, and 4 regions of the world. And if I want to put the question back to the 3 of you, where would you put the 30% of globally protected forests? Because I'm sure if we agree 30% of land is protected, then the most important land ecosystem, forest, must at least have 30% protected areas. And this means in these countries where we have the vast majority of primary forest, the number must be much higher than 30%. It doesn't make sense to have 30% in each and every country that would go against what our ecological findings. But then, of course, we also need the money. And we need to change the situation that all you can make money with is timber, which is still the situation. We need much more money from donor countries to also finance conservation and ecosystem services.
Okay, I said it before, you talk with a lot of passion, Mr. Tees, but actually I would like to, because there were a lot of different topics. You said road building is a big problem. Okay, we can talk about that. And then you also said, well, the money needs to come from some part. And you said, okay, and we need to protect more primeval forests. You said,
and this is all connected, yeah.
Yeah, and this is all connected. So we see there are a couple of problems here. But what would be a solution? Like if you say the money needs to come from some place, what would your solution be? Where should the money come from?
Well, clearly from the donor community, I mean, which I can fully understand Harrison, for instance, because until now, neither on climate nor on nature conservation, we have seen any significant amounts of money from the rich part of the world. And I mean, I'm living in the EU, and Germany is already one of the bigger donors, but most countries give next to nothing, and they share a big responsibility for the past destruction of nature and for climate change, yet they give very little money to mitigate climate change and to appropriately finance an ambitious nature protection agreement to be made in Kunming, China. Okay. Just one more sentence. That's why we are also fighting much more politically and have put less emphasis in the recent times in Greenpeace on the voluntary market instruments like certification. That is not to blame the FSC.
Okay, let's ask Claude Martin, because he has this international experience and he worked for the WWF a very long time, and he also was a consultant for World Bank and others. So you have very much experience there. And how do we get the money from richer countries, so to say, to mitigate somehow climate change? I mean, how can we create more awareness in the developed countries that it's not only a problem of the undeveloped countries, it's also a problem of the developed countries, because we all need a working climate.
Well, we are all involved in awareness creation. And of course, I think there is a lot of awareness here, at least in Europe, about the fate of tropical forests. This is not the problem, nor do I think we can have the illusion that we will find the money to protect 40 times the size of Switzerland. This is the size of the Congo Basin forest, to protect them. There have been many attempts, RED Plus and many others, World Bank, the Congo Basin Forest Partnership, many different attempts. Money cannot solve this. We should not forget, these are governments that are autonomous governments that can decide what happens with their land. If we don't find a solution that is economically viable also for their population, we are pissing against the wind, if you want to say. I'm sorry to say that, but this is a futile thing. We must find solutions. It is absolutely clear what Christoph is saying, that forests provide access to poachers and to slash and burn farming. I've been writing this about West Africa already 30 years ago. But today we see concessions, and I don't agree with your view that FSC concessions have denser networks. You find FSC concessions, I could name them, where you have a forest cover that is virtually undistinguishable from an intact forest landscape now on satellite image, besides the fact that they have higher wildlife population than adjacent national parks. So there is a very large concession up in Northern Republic of Congo, which has 70,000 lowland gorillas. It's not quite an endangered species in a single concession. This is the EFO concession, has 70,000. This is not 70,000 gorillas. Adjacent national parks have not nearly as much wildlife and forest elephants than these concessions. Why? Because the concessionaires are obliged to protect their concessions and do the very best to ensure that whatever scarce leaf are left in the forest after a few years will overgrow. And this is where I don't agree with the definition of the intact forest landscape, which talks of 30 to 70 years should be excluded. I can tell you, I have seen tropical forests in West Africa 50 or even 30 years after they have been logged. And even as a botanist, which I am, you cannot distinguish it from a primary forest. So we should also live with the dynamic of forests and the rehabilitation of forests. As Harrison has mentioned, there is a tremendous rehabilitation of so-called industrial forest land. The most important question is not that, whether there are a few scars. The question is, can it be protected over a long term and remain a contiguous forest area? And some of these concessions have been operating since many decades, and they are the most intact forest lands today in the Congo Basin. And there are good examples of it. There are also bad examples. There are huge differences, but amongst those concessions that are amongst the best, there are the FSC concessions.
So you say that have been that in the past.
My example was from Gabon, about the roads.
I'm sorry. So in the past, there have been rainforest areas which have been under commercial use, and nowadays they look almost like.
Yes, and I have pictures of such areas. Of course, not everyone. There are the big differences, and this is where the work of FSC should be. There are low impact logging techniques which make a huge difference compared to conventional ones.
Okay.
It seems you are a little bit downplaying the road problem, Claude, I think.
Okay, but at least we addressed it a little bit, Christoph Thies. I'm sorry, but I just have to I'm the time watcher here, the time watchdog, so to say. And I would like to invite also Dirk Riestenpart. He wanted to talk as well. Just that you know, Dirk Riestenpart is the chairman of FSC Germany. So he's one of those who organized all, of course, this digital conference. And he's also here and sent to me in the chat that he also wanted to say some last words before we open up for the public. Dirk Riestenpart, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frau Grunwald. Being far from seeing myself as an expert for tropical forestry, certified or not, it was very helpful to hear all your comments. Which was very important for me is obviously that we're talking about two different things. So certainly there will be a necessity for the improvement of conservation of forests. But secondly, I think it's become very clear that most of the experts actually see the certification with FSC as an improvement of forest management, as an improvement of the economic situation in many of the countries where it applies, and in comparison as a better way of managing forests than doing it according to other certification schemes. So from a German perspective, where we talk to consumers about the validity of FSC certification, about the meaning that the logo has, what I've heard up to now actually encourages me to go on with the message that we're proposing to the consumers in terms of what the FSC logo means. So it's socially just, obviously, it's ecologically appropriate and economically viable. That is what the promise of FSC is, and that is what I've heard from the speakers today, that actually applies to the certificates that we have. What I think is important, that we need maybe to talk about fair prices in Germany, because I think the price that we put on the products that come from certified operations will be the main tool to actually stabilize the countries that the products are coming from, that will increase their ability to maintain and improve the government system, which is necessary to have a valid conservation system. And that will be one of the messages that I actually take out from here, and that we could work with further in the German market. Thank you.
Well, and I think it's not only the German market, like we talked about, why that we need to reward much more certified wood somehow, certified wood products. And actually we already have, because now I would really like to open for the audience. We already have a couple of questions. There's one which fits into this issue, and it's coming from Klaus Schmidt. And he says, would not a strong demand for FSC products at fair prices enable also an increase in the proportion of certified forests? So that means if we pay better money for FSC certified products, then maybe also we would have much more FSC certifications or certified areas, of course, because it's worth money. Yeah. So the question is, how can we do that, Claude Maton? You already raised your hand. That's a big problem again. The money.
Mr. Schmidt is absolutely right. There are about 1 million hectares of FSC certified forest area that has been abandoned. That means they are no more under FSC certification in Cameroon alone, because these companies have either gone bankrupt or they have been taken over by Chinese or sold to Chinese companies, which are not doing very sustainable forestry anymore. And the main reason was actually economical. Some of them have not been able to economically use these forests and therefore had to sell them out. And this is the risk with the 6 still existing companies, that if they don't get a premium on certified wood, because the cost of certification is quite high. What you have to do with certification, it's not just the legality and so on, but you have to have all sorts of measures, silvicultural measures, etc., in your concessions. And that all costs money if that is not compensated by a better price. So therefore, the answer to Mr. Schmidt is absolutely, if the price would be more realistic for the product that is coming out, that would promote and probably give an incentive to even maybe Chinese companies. This is a chance. If one would lobby, and I think that would be an interesting idea for Greenpeace if you don't do it, but to try and lobby Chinese enterprises, which are often government enterprises, to go in the direction of certification, that would make a huge difference in the Congo Basin.
Okay, Paolo Cerruti wanted also to answer to that.
One of the major problems is that in the last 20 years, the exports from the Congo Basin specifically have moved from Europe to the East. And the East was 5 years ago, I would agree with China, etc. Now the biggest one that are coming out is India and others. So it will keep changing. But what I mean is that there's not only a competition from above. So certainly consumers need to be made aware. But also there is competition from below. There's a lot of illegally harvested timber that, because it cannot enter anymore Europe, it goes other ways. And that one is also competing, because you can sell at 200, 300 cubic meter, 300 euro per cubic meter lower prices, because you have not respected any law and you don't pay the taxes. So also countries in that sense, so lobbying to China, lobbying to Vietnam, lobbying to India to raise their own bar so that that timber cannot enter anymore their countries. Otherwise, we will always fighting against an elephant against an ant.
Well, we have another interesting question here.
I want to answer the question as well, if I may.
Yeah, because we have another question. It's in the same point of view.
Okay, then I wait.
Yeah, okay. We have Herbert Otte here, and he asks that he says that we all view the whole thing from the scientific side, and then in practice, it's very different. And he says Asians, because we talked about China, Asians will only think about FSC if they are forced to make FSC compliant products. So the question is, why isn't everyone pulling together here instead of accusing each other of failing? So I think he refers to us, that we accuse, that Greenpeace accuses FSC, and the other way around. I wouldn't say that we are accusing, I would say we are discussing, which is a very good thing, that we exchange different points of view. But still we have the question here, Asians will only think about FSC if they are forced to make FSC compliant products. But here we have a problem because FSC is voluntary. So who wants to answer that? Yeah, Mr. Thies?
Yeah, I think, we should be careful not to blame Chinese or Asians for everything. Of course, the consumer awareness might be still a little bit lower than in Europe, but let's go back 20, 30 years in Europe. It was no different. And I think there will be growing awareness. I'm at least quite optimistic with more development also in these regions. And so I think also the consumers will change. But what I'm worried, if unconditional growth on FSC without sharpening the criteria, particularly avoiding what I keep saying, the road building and fragmentation of the last intact forest, would make me very much worried, because I think also Claude, Harrison and Paolo, you are escaping a little bit from the question where the 30% forest in 10 years should be. We are at the moment, we have 300 million hectares or 700 million hectares protected. We need another 800 million hectares. And many of these future areas, they are where we at the moment have FSC concessions. And this is a problem. And I would like to solve this together with you. Okay. And so I think this is really important to make sure unless you disagree with the 30% goal.
Okay, let's get back to Harrison then. The very same question. Where would you protect the rainforest? From where would you get those 30% on?
Well, I think if you look at a country like Gabon, we have about 14 million hectares that are potentially certifiable. And out of those 14 million hectares, there are areas of high conservation value and intact forest landscapes. So provided that we can have an economically meaningful program for Gabon, which it already started, and I think we need to help it by providing more markets. I can see a country like Gabon maintaining or putting aside some intact forest landscapes in that kind of a setting, because it's already on a path where it has got a protected area network, it has got certified forest, and it is also now considering these intact forest landscapes. So we need to work on the economic interests to make them derive more value out of what they have now in the forest sector. That's one. We can also improve the management of protected areas and areas where communities with low impact logging, can use. I don't think it is realistic to have areas completely protected with the population growth, but we can have areas of low impact harvesting, areas which produce ecosystem services for which there should be a global market or a national market for non-timber forest products and so on and so forth. So I think it is not a silver bullet. It's a series of things that need to be done. And in some areas also, we will need to look at areas where protection and use can coexist. And I must say that this isn't a very simple thing to say. Other than saying that, I would also like to say that Gabon has used an economic incentive in that FSC certified companies pay less taxes, export taxes for their timber when they export, than non-certified companies. So what I'm trying to say here is that we should work with countries which are already doing something positive like Gabon. And that's why I think by contagion, their policies could spill over into the Republic of Congo and eventually to the DRC. And we are now reestablishing contact with the DRC so that we can do more work in the Democratic of Congo, Republic of Congo, with the biggest chunk of forest land, over 145 million hectares. So there's a lot we need to do, but we need to address economic development imperatives for the rural poor who mostly live in the poorest people in the Congo Basin are in the forests. And we need to address those.
We also have another question, which is to Mr. Tees, and it comes from Christoph Hinske. And he asked Mr. Tees, because formally you said that Germany, for example, gives a lot of money for the protection of forests. Or is one of those countries who gives at least some amount of money, let's say it that way. We're talking about millions, but it always depends on how many millions you have in total and how much you have to do with that money. Here, Christoph Hinske asked, why is Greenpeace proposing a solution that continues economic dependence of Congo Basin from countries, from Western countries, or from Western capital structure, in terms of if industrial countries donor money, or if they somehow give money to protect the forest, instead of developing their own solutions. So he's asking for, how can you enhance the people there in the countries, in the Congo Basin, to develop their own solutions? Wouldn't that be much better than always the help from industrial countries?
I completely agree, but this will require money. And I want to disagree a little bit here again with Claude, that I agree with you, Claude, that money alone doesn't solve anything. However, without money, we do not solve anything either. So I believe this is, maybe the word donor country or donor community is a bit misleading. I believe this is not a donation like I give to a beggar. I mean, Africa is not the beggar on the planet. I believe this is an obligation. The rich part of the world, as I said before, has done the most to destroy our climate and a large part of our nature in the past, and in order to develop. And the way we developed followed a very bad model, which caused a lot of destruction. So we have an obligation to finance the majority of climate mitigation and adaptation and the majority of nature protection. And this is in order to enable the conditions in developing countries like Africa and Latin America and Asia to be more autonomous in the future. And if, of course, I totally agree. Nobody is there to dictate what should happen in these regions. I can only personally say, as an ecologist, it would be very, very good to see to focus certification on the secondary forest in the Congo Basin, which is more than 50% of the forest area, and to try and redirect certification activities in the primary forest much more towards protected areas and ecosystem services, which there's also a lot of independent checking that needs to be done, and also and to overcome the very big differences in the audition quality, which has been raised before, which is an enormous problem, and also ideally even to reduce the size of concessions to below 100,000 hectares. Because we have an average size of concessions in the Congo Basin of 500,000 hectares on average. This is way too large to ensure proper audition. This, so we have many ideas and we have many compromises. And I think we can. There's a lot that Greenpeace can offer, and I'm not saying this as a European. This comes all from my colleagues in the Greenpeace Congo team.
Yeah. So at last, we always need money. We need more controls, more.
We need definitely also money. Yeah.
Okay. Paolo Cerruti, you wanted to answer to that as well.
Just a common line, a common thread, and the money, absolutely yes. The problem is that I've seen so much money over the last 20 years here living in the Congo Basin that does not reach what we want.
It should reach.
So the definition, we started with a definition. We also need to talk about the definition of what we mean by protection. Okay. So if the money goes for the people that are living in those forests or around those forests and they can protect them, then it's fine. But if we just give money and then the money is eaten in the capital, as it's always happened, that is not the right solution. Okay, and again, to go back to where do we find this 30%? I have no problem with giving the 30%, but we need to revisit the definition of protection. The people will protect the forest in a way or another by doing activities that they are still doing today. But then we hit the wall against, they need roads in a way or another. The places where I live in the Congo Basin, in Kisangani, around Kisangani, for instance, if you don't provide at least a minimum network of roads, the people will never develop. And so we need to find those trade-offs also between protection and where we build those roads.
Yeah, so the problem is we always have both sides. Like, as you said, you need the road to get in somehow that people can make their living. But of course, a road can also be very dramatic or can also open up for illegal logging or for bulldozers or for poaching, wildlife poaching, etc. Okay, we got it. I would try to get to another question, which was actually our first question we had here. And this question comes, it's a bit longer. I will try to make it a little bit more shortened. It's from Stefan Wellhöfer. And he says he's Dr. Stefan Wellhöfer, and he has worked long years in the Amazon and in Brazil in general. And he says that there are a lot of his experience as forest engineer taught him the following. He says that protect wherever you can protect the untouched virgin forests from human use. I think we talked about that. We need to protect virgin forests. Christoph Tief is very happy with that. Then he says, use actively forest plantations where there is enough water, which is an important point, yeah. Agriculture without, or forest plantations without water is a problem. And then finally he says, use the virgin forest sustainably there where you have no other way to protect them. So if you have no other way to protect them, try at least to use it sustainably. And his question is to Mr. Thies again, what other solutions do you see to protect tropical rainforests when there is pressure to use them? Yeah. Apart from
I think maybe,
apart from the sustainable use, do you see
of course, it's
always
always case by case, but so I can give a very simple answer on the big picture. And I think it's not only, first of all, I heard from Claude, Harrison, and Paolo as well, that we need to protect as much as possible primary forests. So I think I'm not alone there. We might maybe differ a little bit in how far we can go, but the importance, I didn't hear anybody, questioning that. So I think we are on the same page. I believe, if the pressure is so high that there is no chance to establish a protected area, then I would always agree that a logging concession is, of course, way better than deforestation for agriculture or pasture. And also, if there is unavoidably a logging concession, I would definitely prefer it's an FSC one than anything else. So I guess, again, we all agree on this, but then I still would make the warning. I would still like to discuss with the FSC what can still be done in the design of the concessions to minimize much more than before the level of road building, because I think we are nowhere near what is possible in an ideal world. And I have seen some very clever concepts to minimize road building. And I can only agree with the question person that the water aspect is extremely important. Of course, when we think about the rainforest and we need to think about where we place logging and timber production, we should definitely, for instance, avoid afforestation in grasslands where naturally there wouldn't be trees growing, and anything that requires artificial irrigation would be a catastrophe in my view.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's get back. Because you always get back to that question, the road constructing. Is there somebody here, Harrison or Paolo, Mr. Martin, who wants to answer to that? What can the FSC do to minimize the effects of the road building? Because I assume that Christoph Thies will ask again if you don't answer it right now. Claude Martin, I think you wanted to answer.
I think what Christoph Thies just said now is not very far away from where I'm coming from. I'm simply saying, I have been involved in the largest protected areas programs in tropical forests. That's the ARPA program in the Amazon and the Yaoundé summit with the conservation forest partnership in the Congo basin. And of course, I would agree that we would need more protected areas if somehow possible. But at a certain moment, you are bouncing against the interest of the individual countries, because a protected area, a national park, doesn't bring any income, not in tropical forests. You don't have any tourists there. You don't see anything in the tropical forest. And therefore, they are chronically understaffed, and you have much higher incidence of poaching. And this is the reason why at times adjacent forest concessions have higher wildlife densities, and not just elephants and gorillas, but all sorts of wildlife is more abundant because some of these companies are protecting their concessions. They are closing roads off. And when you don't need any roads anymore, these feeder roads that feed into the main roads that go through concessions, they lock them off, or you can construct them as such a way that within a few years they overgo completely. That depends on the direction of the road. If you have more light into these roads, they overgrow actually very, very fast. There are a number of species like musanga and even some timber species which grow incredibly rapidly in those things. So these are principles, if they are applied properly. That is low impact logging. I can tell you a mosaic, and we should think of mosaics of protected areas and sustainably used or FSC certified concessions in a mosaic, which all try and preserve biodiversity as good as somehow possible. And you actually achieve a lasting main cover, a continuous forest cover, without claiming you should bring a lot of money and convert everything into a protected areas, which I think is illusionary. So in that sense, I would agree with Christoph if we go in that direction as he has described.
Okay, thanks very much on that. Yeah, I saw that we raised the hand, but I have to watch the time, and I would like to ask one last question, which comes from the audience. This question comes from Annette Scipiol, and she says, actually, this would be a question for Dirk Riesenpat. He's also there, the chairman of FSC Germany, because it's a very German question maybe, or from the German perspective, so to say, what does FSC Germany actually do to promote FSC certified tropical timber, especially concerning the high price? So what do you do to promote FSC tropical timber?
Ms. Scipio, point taken.
Create awareness, of course.
Yeah, probably not enough. I think part of it is many uncertainties about the situation that we actually do have in tropical forests. And I hope, for me at least, one of the really, really fantastic things about this workshop today was that I learned a lot about the evaluation of FSC certification in tropical areas, especially in Africa. And thanks so much for the experts. So I think we might have to reconsider our approach towards tropical timber within FSC Germany as well, and think about how we can actually help to stabilize the situation by developing prices that are even more worth the timber than what we already achieve. So let me take the chance and add another aspect of certification that might also be in line with the demand for preserved, protected conservation areas. I think it's I'm not sure about the specific FSC standards in Africa, but I'm certain that there are requirements for set-aside areas, of course, which might be of much larger scale than what we achieve in Germany. So those are to be considered IFL areas, of course, which also have the benefit of being within the scope of a concession and having the benefits of being in the protection of these private concession compared to what national services in national parks, as Claude Martin pointed out, are able to supply. So I hope I answered the first question. I hope I maybe added another aspect to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, and I just got a sign that we still have some minutes left, so that opens up the question for Heiko Liedecker. No, I'm sorry, we already had that. That's a comment. Sorry there. Sorry, I wanted the question from Jutta Buschbohm, and she asks, do you think the monitoring framework of the CBD post 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, by providing a background of facts, if that will change the forestry context in the playing field? Might the opposite standpoints of Greenpeace and FSC, as we have seen here, we have opposite standpoints or points of view, in such a different context become obsolete because certification becomes embedded in a fact-based protection framework? Maybe this goes for Claude Martin.
Well, I wouldn't exclude it. The question is, does it open a can of worms if people have to agree to such a network? I think Harrison probably will be the better person to answer that question.
Harrison?
I'd just like to say that I think certification in the way we do it has a lot of relevance, regardless of any frameworks that is put in. I would like to see a solution which has certification in it. And I think Greenpeace is an important factor in this because they keep us on our toes on certain matters like road construction. And I would like to say that at the moment in our standards, we are beginning to see a lot more sensitivity of road construction. And one of the requirements for road construction is to decommission most of them so that they can overgrow, as Claude has mentioned. And I think CIFOR that Paolo represents have actually done studies of post-logging recoveries in extraction roads that are created in these protected areas. So I think the level of consciousness of road construction is very important for us, and we are addressing this. And we are also saying that large peatland areas like the ones in the DRC and the Republic of Congo in the north are not to be logged over at all. So I think whatever we say, I think certification is a very, very important part in the Congo forest. It's also a very, very important part in the restoration agenda under the Africa 100 and the Bond Challenge, where we want to restore 100 million hectares in Africa. So I see the certification agenda not becoming irrelevant in any way. And I can say that the more dialogue we have with Greenpeace, the more we will have a situation where we can have dialogue on important issues, and Greenpeace can also help us tackle some of the global economic conditions that create incentives for illegal activities in the tropics. So that is my answer. It doesn't answer the question directly, but it puts it in a broader context.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks very much, Dan. Actually, I just have one last question for all of you. It's the same question for all of you. And I would like to ask you to answer with hopefully only one sentence. Let's see if it works. And of course, at the end of this discussion, we want to have a small glimpse into the future. And I would like to know what would be the state of the tropical rainforest in the Congo Basin in, let's say, 50 years? What will we have? Will we have more loss, more degradation, or will we maybe even have more protected areas and maybe also some recovery? What do you think? How will be the picture in 50 years in the Congo Basin? Who wants to start? Claude Nathan.
Let me start, because this is a very important question, to have this long-term view.
Yeah.
Now, we have not talked about one factor, and this is the factor that worries me more than anything else, and that's climate change. Because many of these tropical forests in the Amazon basin, as well as in the Congo basin, they are relatively dry forests. That means they have drought periods which are at the fringe of determining whether it's a moist tropical forest or a dry forest or a different forest type. And we have seen now with climate change that these drought periods are getting longer and longer. And the Congo basin, there are satellite images which show that they are becoming increasingly prone to drought. And drought can, of course, in a fragmented forest, and this is the reason why it is so important to have a contiguous forest cover. A fragmented forest is much more prone to forest fires, which then triggers, this is a positive feedback loop, triggers further climate change and so on. So anything that can be done to keep a contiguous forest cover is the most important precondition. And perhaps we should have talked also about other possibilities of involving small-scale agriculturals, agroforestry types of systems, etc., that keep certain areas, even if they are under agricultural use, under some vegetation. Also secondary forest, replanting or forest rejuvenation in certain areas that are not primary would be an important aspect of all of this.
Okay, but what do you think in 50 years? What will be the situation of the rainforest? Are you rather optimistic or not?
Well, at the current moment, I think I would exaggerate if I will be very optimistic, seeing the current trends. Okay. But we know much more than in the past. Okay. So it's like with COVID. In the beginning, we didn't know anything. Now we need much more. We know much more if only we would apply all this knowledge in a correct way.
To deal with it. Okay, thank you very much, Christoph Thies. You want to?
Yeah, I want to.
What would be the situation?
First of all, completely agree with Claude, and this is exactly why we are so worried about the roads, because of the drying. You know, the scientists call it the ecological edge effects, and the leading scientist who spent all his life on these effects is Bill Lawrence from Australia. which could be extremely helpful. He researched this in all of the tropical regions. And these dialogues with the FSC must be much more. And I believe the Congo Basin forest is the most threatened forest in the world. Still, maybe I'm a notorious optimist. I'm a bit encouraged by the new Biden administration in the US, and maybe a very delicate small comeback of multilateralism and more cooperation on the planet. And then I give the Congo, even the Congo Basin forest, a chance. But the backbone needs to really be still the intact forest areas, not only in the Congo Basin, but in all the other regions where we still have them as well.
Okay, you give the rainforest a chance in 50 years. Let's see, Paolo Cerruti, what would you say? What will be the situation of the rainforest in 50 years? Better?
I give plenty
worse?
Chances. We need to work a lot on the demographics,
okay.
But plenty chances.
Okay, Harrison, you're optimistic? Okay,
yes,
Harrison, what do you say?
I'm quite optimistic. I don't think we'll lose much in Gabon. I'm more fearful of the Democratic Republic of Congo with a high population. So there we'll see greater chances of degradation. And I think on saying that, I would like us to put a lot more effort in engaging the Democratic Republic of Congo to stabilize loss of forest cover. But I'm optimistic that we'll still have at least half the forest cover we have in 50 years, if not more. But I'm quite optimistic.
Okay, so 2 out of the 4 see more than the dangers, and the other 2 are more optimistic. I think that's a broad picture somehow. We have both sides, and I say thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, to Harrison Kojang, to Claude Martin, to Paolo Cerruti and Christoph Thies. And of course, I say thank you to our wonderful audience. Thank you for being interested, and thank you for all your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't ask all the questions, but time is over right now. I think you also had a good time. I hope so. And I have some last information for all of you. The next discussion panel about FSC certification in Brazil was supposed to be on February 4th, but that will be postponed to the 2nd week in March. And the concrete date will be announced shortly on the German website konferenz.fsc-deutschland.de. Da finden Sie alle Infos zur verschobenen Konferenz. And I also like to invite you to the discussion panel about benefits and challenges of FSC certification in Russia. Today we talked about the Congo Basin, but we also want to talk about Russia and the problems and benefits there. Here we do have a concrete date. If you wish, we will meet on Thursday, February 11th at 4 p.m. German time. And please find more information on that also on the website. And with that, I will say thanks again. Thanks again to the audience. Stay interested and stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you.